If there's a moment etched into my heart like a cold blade, it was that April afternoon, just a few weeks before my graduation ceremony at Wharton Business School. A brief phone call, a few curt words, but enough to unearth all the memories I'd buried for 22 years. My name is Madison Clark, 22 years old, a senior majoring in finance. After 4 years in Philadelphia, I was about to step onto Wharton's prestigious stage to receive my honors degree, a milestone I'd earned through sweat, tears, and countless sleepless nights. It was supposed to be the day my family sat in the front row, clapping enthusiastically, capturing every proud moment. Instead, I received a response so cold it extinguished all the light around me. That afternoon, I called home. In my mind, I pictured my mother beaming with pride, my father asking for details, and my younger sister, Chloe, pretending to be indifferent, but agreeing to attend. I wanted to tell them I'd be standing on stage with the top students of my class, that my thesis had earned high praise from my professor, that this was not just my achievement but our family's. The phone rang 3 times before my father's voice came through, dry, abrupt, as if I'd interrupted an important meeting. "What's up?" "Dad, I'm calling to confirm my graduation ceremony. Will you and Mom be there? It's on Saturday the 14th. I'll send the official invitation too." Silence hung on the line for a few seconds. Then his reply hit like a hammer. "We can't make it. Take the bus yourself. We're busy taking Chloe to pick up her car." I froze. "Car?" I blurted out. "Bentley," he said casually, as if quoting the price of a kitchen appliance. "Her high school graduation gift. They say the heart can truly ache." I never believed it until that moment. My chest tightened, my breath heavy as if I'd inhaled the biting cold of winter instead of the gentle spring breeze outside my dorm window. In my mind, I saw a familiar scene: my 18-year-old sister Chloe, with her radiant blonde hair and dazzling smile, standing beside a gleaming Bentley adorned with a giant red bow. My parents would embrace her, tears of joy in their eyes. And me? The eldest child who'd carried every expectation, studied tirelessly, and asked for nothing all these years. I was told to take the bus. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, it's my graduation. Wharton Business School, remember?" "We know," he replied. "But Chloe only graduates high school once. You're grown. You can handle it." "You can handle it." Those 3 words fell like cold pebbles. It was the familiar refrain of my childhood, a slogan my parents used to mask their blatant favoritism. I bit my lip, stifling a bitter laugh. When the call ended, I sat motionless at my desk. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor with a sharp thud. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the campus in gold, students chattering excitedly about graduation and the families who'd come to celebrate. But I felt like an outsider. Part of me still held on to hope. Maybe my parents were lying to keep a big surprise. Maybe on the day, they'd show up unannounced, holding flowers, eyes teary. But the part of me used to their indifference whispered, "Don't dream. They never chose you." That feeling, both painful and familiar, was like a closed loop, pulling me back to childhood memories. My 8th birthday, when I got a set of textbooks. 2 months later, Chloe got a princess party with a real pony in the backyard. My high school awards ceremony, where I delivered the valedictorian speech alone while they photographed Chloe at her piano recital. The memories piled up, lining up in my mind like undeniable evidence. I wondered, was I wrong to always strive harder, hoping one day they'd be proud? Or did my success become their excuse to neglect me, believing I could handle it? That evening, I walked around campus. The church bells echoed, the scent of coffee from a nearby shop mingled with the breeze. Philadelphia buzzed with life, but inside me was a heavy silence. I watched buses pass, strangers' faces blurring behind foggy windows. A mocking vision flashed. Me, in my graduation gown, dragging a suitcase, boarding that bus to the biggest day of my life, while my sister sat in a shiny Bentley, my family cheering. The more I thought, the more it felt both absurd and bitter. Absurd that my wealthy parents, whose eldest daughter was self-sufficient and successful, told her to take a bus. Bitter because I still craved something simple they'd never give, their presence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I told myself it was time to break that painful cycle. If my family didn't see my worth, I'd prove it, not for them, but for me. Deep down, though, I was still just a 22-year-old girl, longing for my parents to hug me and say, "You did great." And that's how my story began, with a chilling phone call, with words that seemed ordinary but carved a deep wound of abandonment. Have you ever felt that? The sting when those who should support you turn away? If you've ever been overlooked, placed behind someone else, share with me. Because this story isn't just mine, it's a voice for anyone who's had to prove their worth to their own family. Stay with me, because what happened after that call will surprise you even more. They say childhood is the most beautiful time of life. But for me, it wasn't a carefree field of flowers. It was a stage where the spotlight always shone on my sister, while I stood in the shadows, holding a script no one bothered to read. Our Chicago home lacked for nothing. The basement was a private movie theater, the garage housed a rotation of luxury cars, and the backyard was big enough for an outdoor wedding. Outsiders probably thought I was born into a dream, but dreams can be nightmares too. And my nightmare began the day Chloe was born. I still remember that moment. I was 4, naive enough to think a new sibling meant a playmate, an ally. But the second my father held Chloe, my mother's eyes glowing as if she'd found a treasure, I knew my place had shifted. I was no longer the center. I was just the big sister, expected to set an example. I didn't object. As a child, I only wanted love, but the disparity became impossible to ignore. For my 8th birthday, my parents gave me a set of advanced math textbooks. "You're smart. You need a challenge," my mother said with a smile. I forced a smile back, though I secretly wanted a small party with balloons like my classmates had. 2 months later, Chloe turned 4, and our backyard became a pink palace, a giant inflatable castle, a 3-tier cake, and a real pony for her to ride. Neighbors filled the yard, laughter echoing late into the night. I stood in a corner, clutching my textbooks, telling myself, maybe I'm too old for that. "You're stronger, you don't need as much." That was my parents' mantra, repeated like background music. I heard it so often, I started repeating it to myself to feel less hurt. But the truth was, each time I heard it, I felt pushed further away, as if my strength was their perfect excuse to shower Chloe with indulgence. Our annual family vacations were no different. I wanted to attend a summer science camp to learn about stars and build model rockets. My mother patted my head. "Next year, sweetie. Chloe really wants to go to Disney World this year." So we flew to Florida, and I forced a smile as Chloe posed with Cinderella, while I longed for a telescope. That next year never came. My academic achievements fared no better in their eyes. I brought home straight A's and medals from academic clubs. My father only nodded. "As expected, Madison." But when Chloe got a rare B+, the family popped champagne to celebrate her amazing progress. I sat there wondering if I lived in a parallel universe. Honestly, I never fully blamed Chloe. She grew up in the spotlight my parents created, accustomed to getting everything. But that didn't erase the gap between us. I became the model sister, while she was the darling. And that divide grew sharper over time. When I was 16, I asked my father to help buy an old Honda to get to school. He glanced at me. "Work for it yourself, you're strong enough." I swallowed my tears, hearing that familiar refrain. A year later, the moment Chloe was old enough to drive, my parents bought her a brand new Audi, instructing us to keep it a secret for a surprise. I forced a smile at the key-handing party, but inside a part of me died. The strength they pinned on me became an invisible cage. I learned not to ask, not to expect, and never to cry in front of them. I became an expert at hiding emotions, but you know what? Kids are just kids. I craved my parents' hugs, their praise, their pride, simple things that felt like luxuries to me. Whenever I tried to protest, I was labeled selfish. Once I complained to my mother, "It's not fair that my birthday was just books, while Chloe got a big party." She looked at me as if I'd said something absurd. "Madison, You're the older sister. You need to learn to yield. Chloe needs encouragement, but you're already enough. Enough? I didn't know what enough meant. Enough achievements? Enough sacrifices? Enough for them to forget I needed love too? Gradually, I retreated into my own world. I buried myself in books, joined every club, did everything to fill the void in my heart. I told myself success would make them notice. But deep down, I knew their proud gaze would always be for Chloe, no matter what I achieved. Years later, looking back, I see my childhood like a family photo in the living room. Chloe stood in the center, radiant, my parents embracing her tightly. And me? I was there, but blurred in the right corner, my eyes staring at the camera, unnoticed. You might think I'm bitter, but the truth is that favoritism didn't just hurt me, it trapped Chloe too. She was taught everything belonged to her, that the world revolved around her. And that belief, sooner or later, would become a burden. But back then, I wasn't mature enough to see that. I only knew I was living in darkness. Now, as I recount this, I realize that darkness didn't destroy me. It quietly forged a tough shell, an inner strength my parents never anticipated. They thought they were neglecting me, but that neglect created a Madison who wouldn't easily fall. That was my childhood, rich in material wealth but poor in affection. A place where I learned to live with the repeated mantra, "You're stronger, you don't need much." But in that not needing much, a scar formed, one that would lead me to the critical choices ahead. Some moments in life leave lasting scars without ever needing a blade. For me, that scar is named Valedictorian Day, the day I was supposed to shine brightest but ended up performing a solo act before empty seats. Picture this. You're 18, standing on the stage of your high school auditorium, spotlights blazing, the microphone amplifying your voice across the room. It's the moment every student dreams of, the moment you're recognized as valedictorian, the pride of your family. Yes, your family, but what if the seats reserved for your family are empty? Then, the spotlight becomes a whip lashing straight at your heart. That day, I'd worked tirelessly for 4 years, joined every club, stayed up late writing reports, led the debate team, edited the school newspaper. It wasn't just personal ambition. I held on to hope that one day, my parents would look at me and say, "You make us proud." I craved that look so much, I imagined it every night before bed. The news of my valedictorian status spread like wildfire through the school. Friends, teachers, neighbors all congratulated me. And my parents? My father only shrugged. "It's what we expected, Madison." My mother glanced at her watch. "That day conflicts with Chloe's piano recital. We'll need to figure it out." Can you hear it? Figure it out. That phrase was like a cold verdict. From that moment, I knew figuring it out in the Clark family meant prioritizing Chloe absolutely, while the rest, including me, was secondary. The night before graduation, I clung to a faint hope. Maybe they'd split up. Mom with Chloe, dad with me, or vice versa. I even wrote a small note to slip into an envelope for them. "Please watch me on stage. I need your eyes." But the next morning, as I put on my Navy graduation gown, my mother texted briefly, "Madison, we're with Chloe. Handle it yourself. We'll watch the video later." Watch the video, as if their presence could be replaced by a blurry clip on a TV screen. I walked into the auditorium. The opening music played, the family section filled with proud faces. I scanned the crowd. In vain. The row with the Clark family sign was empty, polished as if scrubbed clean to highlight their absence. It was my turn on stage. The microphone was cold in my hands, the lights blinding. I began my speech about perseverance and ambition, my voice trembling but clear. I looked down, seeing hundreds of parents smiling for their kids. For me, there was only an empty void swallowing all my efforts. Some in the crowd teared up from emotion. But I knew if I cried right then, no one would wipe my tears. I stood alone, facing the truth. On the biggest day of my life, my family chose Chloe's piano over standing behind me. As I finished, applause roared like thunder. I bowed, a smile plastered on my face. But inside, I made a decision. From now on, I wouldn't wait for their recognition. I'd carve my own path, and if they ever looked back, it would be a surprise, not a gift I offered them. After the ceremony, friends invited me to take photos with their families. I stood beside other parents, forcing a smile in someone else's frame. When someone asked, "Where's your family?" I replied curtly, "Busy." One word, as if my pride was worth less than an unfinished piano piece. That night, I came home, opened my closet, and placed the valedictorian certificate on a shelf. Chloe had just returned from her recital, holding a huge bouquet, my mother beaming. She played wonderfully. The audience gave a standing ovation. My father added, "Well deserved, Chloe. You're truly special." And me? I quietly closed my bedroom door. Light from the hallway seeped through the crack, illuminating my shiny new certificate, gleaming but cold. I lay on my bed, listening to their laughter outside, realizing I'd been erased from the family script long ago. But the irony is, that wound became my strength. I learned not to expect, not to depend. I swore I'd rise, and one day, when the world called my name, my parents would sit there, stunned, wondering how their self-sufficient daughter went so far. You might think I'm harsh, but put yourself in my shoes. Have you ever poured everything into something only to be met with indifference? Have you ever spoken to a cheering crowd but felt your heart empty because the most important people weren't there? If you have, you'd understand the resolve in my eyes that day. That day, I learned a costly lesson. Family recognition doesn't always come, and sometimes you have to be your own witness to your success. But I didn't know that lesson was just the beginning, because as I stepped into college, the world would test me far more harshly. And to survive, I'd have to truly live up to the phrase my parents always repeated, but in a completely different way. You can handle it. Everyone has a defining summer, one that forces you to grow up, whether you want to or not. For me, it was the summer after high school graduation, before starting at Harvard. People call it a gap year, full of experiences, or the last carefree summer of youth. For me, it was a summer of bitter coffee, piles of paperwork, crying children, and above all, a vow etched deeper than any tattoo. If no one lifts me up, I'll stand on my own. Right after receiving my Harvard acceptance letter, I faced a brutal truth: the astronomical tuition and living costs. My parents could easily afford it. They'd just put a deposit on a new luxury SUV for my mother. But when I brought it up, the familiar response echoed, "You're stronger. Handle it yourself." I almost laughed. They saw it as a compliment. I heard it as a sentence. But instead of begging, I decided to turn it into fuel. I applied everywhere, and within a week, I had 3 jobs: barista at a Starbucks near home, temporary office assistant at an insurance company, and math tutor for neighborhood kids. Each job brought out a different version of me. Mornings, I wore a green apron, forcing a smile as customers ordered venti caramel macchiato, extra shot, non-fat milk, half foam, 2 pumps vanilla, 3 pumps hazelnut. I thought, if my memory was used for coffee recipes instead of finance equations, I'd be the best barista ever. Afternoons, I sat in an air-conditioned office, eyes glued to Excel, entering insurance contract data. Other employees glanced at me, an 18-year-old with her hair tied back, typing like she was racing life itself. I saw their pity mixed with curiosity. How desperate must this girl be to work like this at her age? They didn't know the answer was simple. I needed money to prove myself to my own family. Evenings, I became a tutor, holding a whiteboard, patiently explaining geometry to an 8th grader. When he cheered for solving a problem, I smiled genuinely, the rare moment in my day. In that instant, I felt I wasn't invisible, wasn't overlooked, but truly adding value to someone's life. Every day, I came home near midnight, exhausted, limbs aching. But in my small room, I opened my laptop, calculating college costs, tuition, dorm fees, books, living expenses. The numbers were suffocating. I tracked every penny, marking each dollar earned. Every week, I taped a small note to my wall. Saved another $200. That wall became proof of my effort, a diary not of words but numbers. Some nights, I fell asleep face down on my accounting notebook. Others, I brewed coffee and dreamed of sitting in a Harvard lecture hall, earbuds in, scribbling notes, heart racing. That vision was a distant light guiding me through endless shifts. My parents? They saw me as playing pretend. My mother occasionally asked, "Do you need some money, honey?" It sounded kind, but her tone was like offering alms to a beggar, not supporting her daughter. I only replied, "I'm fine." My father didn't bother asking. He was busy calculating stock investments or eyeing a new golf club set. To them, my hustle wasn't admirable, it was expected. One evening, I came home to a scene I'll never forget. The family was gathered in the living room. Chloe showed off her new prom dress, my parents gushing with praise, while I walked in, my uniform stained with coffee. No one asked about my 14-hour day. No one noticed my blistered hands. I stood there, watching them laugh, and a voice rose inside me. Enough. I would never again let my worth depend on their half-hearted applause. That night, alone in my room, I wrote on a blank sheet, "If no one lifts me up, I'll stand on my own." I taped it to the center of my wall, where I'd see it every morning. It wasn't a cliché slogan. It was my compass, a vow carved into my blood. The irony? My parents bragged to friends about how proud they were of my independence, saying, "Madison's so strong, she doesn't need much help." In truth, I was left to swim or sink. I heard those words from a neighbor and gave a faint smile. If they wanted to paint a false picture, I'd let them, because one day I'd stand before the world and their pretense would mean nothing. By summer's end, I sat in the beat-up Toyota I'd bought with my savings. The paint was peeling, the AC worked only when it wasn't too hot, but it was mine, earned by my hands. I drove to Cambridge carrying my luggage, a few suitcases, some savings, and a vow to never fall. On the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Chicago fade. I knew I'd cut the last thread of hope that my parents would change. From here, I'd walk a path I chose myself. That summer forged the resilience that became my foundation. Without those exhausting shifts, those nights counting pennies, I might not have been strong enough for the storms ahead. And I didn't know that storm would come sooner than I thought, right in my early years at Harvard. People imagine Ivy League college life as a perfect postcard. Ivy-covered buildings, students lounging on grass reading philosophy, lavish parties where power connections are traded over wine. For me, Harvard wasn't a postcard. It was a giant blender, where I was both swept up and forced to keep spinning to avoid being crushed. A symphony of exhaustion. My freshman year, I realized studying at Harvard was enough to drive an average student mad. But I couldn't be average. I was juggling full-time studies and 3 jobs to survive. Mornings, I sat behind the library counter, eyes fixed on a screen, checking returned books while cramming microeconomics. Noon, I scarfed down instant ramen in a corner before biking to deliver food to wealthier students. Ones who ordered salads worth my day's wages, only to eat half and toss the rest. Evenings, I wore a black uniform at a retail store, smiling politely as customers tried on $500 dresses, while my coat came from a thrift shop. Some days, I slept less than 4 hours. I vividly remember a winter night my freshman year, sitting in my cramped dorm, hands trembling from cold, typing an economics essay while my stomach growled. When I submitted it, I collapsed on my desk. When I woke, it was dawn, and I ran to class. Eyes so dark, a classmate whispered, "Did you get in a fight?" I laughed. "Yeah, with life." The cost of strength. My parents would probably be proud. They'd said I was stronger, didn't need much. Now it was true. I didn't need much, just 3 jobs, a pack of ramen, and a few hours sleep to survive. Sometimes I wondered, if they saw me trudging through snow to deliver pizza, would they feel guilty? Then I laughed. Of course not. They'd say, "Madison's so independent." But in those grueling months, I learned something money couldn't buy: resilience. I realized if I could manage Harvard and 3 jobs, nothing later could break me. Meeting Jessica, my chosen family. In that exhausting whirlwind, I met Jessica Rodriguez. We bonded in the library, fighting over a cheap, outdated finance textbook. "I need this," I said, almost desperate. So do I, she shot back, just as firm. We stared, then burst out laughing, realizing neither could afford the $100 new edition. Solution? Split it. I kept it during the day, she at night. From sharing a book, we shared meals, split ramen costs, and eventually shared our loneliness. Jessica from Arizona, daughter of a single mother, also juggled multiple jobs and sleepless nights. We'd meet in the dorm kitchen, cooking cheap rice, splitting frozen veggies. One night, when I collapsed from exhaustion, Jessica draped a thin blanket over me and whispered, "You're not alone." Those simple words were worth more than any gift. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, filling the loneliness. Even with Jessica, I often felt a piercing loneliness. I saw classmates join equestrian clubs or vacation in Europe during winter break. For me, break meant extra retail shifts to earn a few $100. While they posted romantic Paris photos, I showed off, chapped hands from the cold. Instead of envy, I observed, I saw many who had everything handed to them but didn't value it. I thought, one day I'll surpass you. Not with my parents' help, but with these cracked hands. The drama of early years. One dramatic moment came when I fainted in class. The previous day I'd worked 14 hours, then stayed up writing a report. Mid-presentation, the room spun, and everything went black. I woke in the infirmary, Jessica holding my hand. "Madison, you need to rest," she said sternly. "I can't," I whispered. "If I stop, I'll fall behind." She looked at me, angry, yet pitying. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone." I gave a dry laugh. "I do, to myself." That moment, I knew my chosen path left no room for weakness. I had to keep going, no matter the cost. A message from the dark. In those late nights, typing in a dim room, I repeated, "If no one lifts me up, I'll stand on my own." The vow from that summer before Harvard became the fuel keeping me through each shift. And then, in that darkness, a spark appeared. It was when I met Professor Wilson, the first person at Harvard to see me not just as an exhausted student, but as a mind with potential. But that's a story for another chapter. Those early Harvard years taught me more than any class. Exhaustion can wear down the body but sharpen the will. Sometimes, family isn't where you're born, but who stands with you in pain. Jessica was proof of that. A chosen family I was lucky to find. I didn't know when I'd escape this cycle, but one thing I was sure of, I wouldn't fall. If you asked me the moment that changed my life, I wouldn't say it was graduating from Wharton or when NextGate hit $1 billion valuation. Those grand milestones were just outcomes. The real turning point came quietly, in a rainy afternoon class, with a research paper I submitted looking like a raccoon from exhaustion. It was Professor Thomas Wilson's Applied Economics and Emerging Markets class, a man known for being both strict and revered. Tall, lean, salt and pepper hair, silver-rimmed glasses, he walked as if carrying a library in his head. Students called him Mount Wilson, imposing, unapproachable, cold. When he assigned the research topic, he said curtly, "I want you to analyze an emerging financial trend, but don't just describe it. Give me your perspective." While classmates wrote about China's real estate or European bonds, I, ever the contrarian, chose cryptocurrency. Bitcoin had just crashed, dubbed a scam of the century by the press. But I saw beyond the bubble, blockchain, a technology that could reshape how the world works. I stayed up 3 nights straight, juggling work and diving into white papers, studying security flaws, analyzing transaction speed issues. When I submitted, I honestly thought I'd get a raised eyebrow from Wilson like, "Another dreamy kid." But a week later, when he returned the papers, mine had no grade, just a handwritten note. "Madison, meet me after class." I remember my heart pounding louder than the rain outside. I entered his office, a small room stacked with books and files. Professor Wilson sat behind his desk staring at my paper. "Miss Clark," he began, voice low and deliberate, "do you know what you just wrote?" I swallowed. "A risky essay?" He chuckled, a rare sound. "No, You wrote a graduate-level analysis, and you did it in a week. I was stunned. In that moment, I felt discovered after years of hiding in the dark. I see potential in you, he continued. Would you like to join my research group on financial technology? I didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. From that day, I stepped into a new world. Wilson's research group had 7 students, all so brilliant I felt small. But strangely, while at home I was always the one who could handle it, here, I was truly valued. My ideas were heard, debated, noted carefully. We analyzed digital payment models, discussed data security, tested new blockchain protocols. Every afternoon meeting felt like a kid's first trip to an amusement park. Once, I pitched an idea, a platform to make crypto transactions faster, safer, and accessible to regular people, not just tech enthusiasts. The group fell silent for a moment, then Wilson nodded. That's not just an idea. That could be a company. In that moment, a seed was planted, the seed of what the world would later know as NextGate. Oddly, despite still juggling 3 jobs, the research group made me feel I wasn't just surviving for tuition. I saw a bigger vision. I could build something that changed the game. Of course, old wounds lingered. Every thought of my parents echoed their mantra, "You're stronger. You don't need much." But now, I realize they were partly right. I didn't need much, just a chance, someone to see me. And Wilson did that. The irony, my parents overlooked every achievement, calling them expected. But a near stranger of a professor saw me, believed in me, and opened the door to entrepreneurship. Some might call it luck. I call it a sweet paradox. Sometimes family comes from those with no blood ties. One late afternoon, as I packed up in the research room, Wilson said softly, "Madison, great ideas often come from personal pain. Don't run from it. Let it fuel you." I froze. No one had ever said that. I realized he was referring to how I saw blockchain, not just as tech, but as a tool for fairness. I'd been overlooked, undervalued. Why not create a platform where everyone had an equal shot? That night in my dorm, watching snow fall outside, a new resolve burned. I wouldn't just study for a degree or work to survive. I'd build something of my own, something even my parents couldn't ignore. That seed was small, but I felt it sprouting in my heart. Maybe you're finding this journey more intriguing, right? From a girl neglected by her family, I was taking my first steps into fintech entrepreneurship, all thanks to a professor who saw what my parents never did. But could that seed grow into a tree amidst the storms of tuition, jobs, and doubt from all sides? If you find this story compelling, comment Y. If not, comment N. They say billion-dollar companies start with whiteboards, sleek glass boardrooms, or Silicon Valley pitches. The truth? NextGate, the company that changed my life, began with a cold coffee in a cramped research room where we ate instant noodles and dreamed of a fairer financial world. After that discussion with Professor Wilson, the idea lingered. What if crypto transactions could be faster, safer, more accessible? That night, in my dorm, watching numbers dance on my screen, I didn't just see an academic problem, I saw opportunity. But an idea unshared is just a dream. I turned to Jessica Rodriguez, my best friend, whom I mentioned in Chapter 5. If you want to know why Jessica became my biggest emotional anchor, check my earlier video where I detail how we split an old textbook. I told her, "Listen, what if we built a platform that makes crypto transactions fast, secure like a bank, and easy like Venmo?" She stared, then laughed. "Madison, you just described something that could shake up finance." I shrugged. "Or just a delusional dream." She tilted her head. "But you're not the type to dream idly." That sentence turned my spark into lightning. We recruited a few from the research group, 2 computer science students and an MBA whiz at marketing. Wilson's tiny research room became NextGate HQ. Old laptops, scattered notepads, piles of noodle boxes. We named it NextGate, the next gate to new financial pathways. Looking back, I don't know where that confidence came from. Maybe when you have nothing to lose, you dare to bet everything. We worked until 2-3 a.m., coding, sketching workflows, arguing over security algorithms. I'd sit quietly after meetings, both thrilled and terrified. If we failed, was this just a student game? But a voice reminded me, no, this is your chance to escape the handle it yourself shadow. Opportunity came faster than expected. Harvard held an annual startup competition with a $50,000 prize and investor mentorship. Jessica insisted I apply. I hesitated. We only have an idea and some code. But she laughed. That's why we need the $50,000. We submitted, prepped our pitch. On stage, my hands shook, nearly dropping the mic. Before me were judges, industry titans, and a packed auditorium. I began. The future of finance isn't whether blockchain exists, but who makes it reliable and accessible to all. I spoke of working 3 jobs, of the unfairness where the rich access financial tools while the poor don't. I wanted NextGate to be a gateway to equity. When I finished, applause roared. I glanced at Jessica, her eyes sparkling, and then, the unbelievable. NextGate won. We got $50,000 and a ticket to the big leagues. A week later, I got an email from Michael Chen, a venture capitalist who sold a social tech startup to Facebook for hundreds of millions. He wrote, I want to hear more about NextGate. Lunch this week? My heart pounded. I'd read about him, saw him as a distant legend. Now he sat across from me in a modest Chinese restaurant, eating dim sum, listening to my pitch. When I finished, he set down his chopsticks, looking at me. Madison, your idea could go far, but do you have the guts to make it real? I didn't hesitate. I've lived my whole life proving I do. He smiled. Good. I'll invest. I nearly stopped breathing. Michael Chen, who could raise millions with a call, believed in me. But with the thrill came immense weight. From this moment, NextGate wasn't a student dream, it was a commitment, and I had no way back. The victory high lasted days, then reality hit. $50,000 sounded big, but in startups, it was aspirin for heart surgery. We needed an office, servers, security, marketing, all costly. I felt like I was rowing a leaky boat in an ocean. Each day, the to-do list grew, the budget shrank. I slept less, worried more, and sometimes wondered, was I diving into an abyss? Jessica often caught me staring blankly at my screen at midnight. She put a hand on my shoulder. Madison, you don't have to carry it all alone. I wanted to believe her, but deep down I knew, if NextGate failed, I couldn't return to square one like others. I'd be back in that empty valedictorian seat, hearing, you're stronger, you don't need much. And I swore I'd never relive that. When writing this, I recall the mix of excitement and panic in those early NextGate days. It was a tiny seed, but it held my desire to break free from my family's shadow. Question for you. In my place, would you bet your youth on a risky idea like that? Some nights you lie awake worrying about tomorrow's exam. Others, it's heartbreak. But then there are nights, like mine, where a fledgling company, Your Honor, and your dream of escaping your family's shadow rest on your shoulders. And I carried that through 4 sleepless nights. NextGate had just won the startup competition and secured Michael Chen's investment. If you don't know him, check my last video about the dim sum meeting that changed everything. We were riding a high, believing the future was ours. Then one evening, as we tested the latest demo, the screen flashed red. Security breach detected. A coder whispered, Madison, someone just hacked our test system. My heart sank. If an amateur hacker could breach our firewall in minutes, who'd trust NextGate to secure million-dollar transactions? We dove into fixing it. But that night, bad news piled on. A key coder, the one who wrote our core algorithm, quit, citing needing to focus on studies. I didn't blame him, but seeing his 2 a.m. resignation email, I wanted to scream, why now? His exit wasn't just a loss of talent. It shook the team's morale. I looked around our tiny startup room. Old laptops, a whiteboard scribbled with notes, stacks of noodle boxes. Everyone looked drained. And I knew our $50,000 prize was evaporating faster than steam from my coffee. But the worst wasn't the money. It was doubting myself. Was I just a dreamy kid leading friends to a dead end? Were my parents right that I should handle it within my limits? If you want to know why that phrase haunted me, watch my earlier video about how my parents always chose Chloe over me. We didn't give up. Instead, we entered a marathon battle. I practically lived in the office. Night 1, I downed 5 Red Bulls, hands shaking as I typed. Night 2, my head spun, numbers dancing before my eyes. Night 3, I heard imaginary Slack pings, even with the screen off. Night 4, my body betrayed me. I collapsed on the keyboard, tears soaking my hands. It was the first time I cried in the office. I couldn't keep up the endure everything facade. I was just a 20-year-old, exhausted in a cold room, holding a cracking dream. Jessica, if you don't know her, check my video about how we went from sharing a textbook to being chosen family. Put a hand on my shoulder. Madison, we can't keep going like this. If we stop, it all collapses, I choked. And if you collapse, so does NextGate. I looked into her eyes, seeing raw truth. I couldn't carry the company if I couldn't stand. We held an emergency meeting. For the first time, I spoke not as a star student proving herself, but as a real CEO. No more racing to death. We'll split tasks, set sane shifts. I'll handle the core security fix, but I need you all focused and patient. We don't need perfection now. We need stability first. The team nodded. The air shifted. I realized leadership wasn't shouting loudest. It was knowing when to pause, when to protect your team from burnout. A week later, we launched a new version. The security hole was patched. The demo ran smoothly. Most importantly, we'd learned to stand up after a crisis. At 6 a.m., as sunlight crept into the office, I smiled through bloodshot eyes. I knew I'd changed. I wasn't just Madison, the student juggling 3 jobs for tuition. I was Madison, CEO of NextGate. Sometimes I wondered, if my parents knew I'd stayed up 4 nights to save the company, would they be proud? Or would they repeat, "You're stronger, you don't need much"? Either way, I didn't need their answer. For the first time, I believed I didn't need their recognition. I'd recognized myself. Those 4 sleepless nights taught me more than 4 years of high school combined. They taught me leadership means standing firm in a storm, that tears aren't weakness but truth you can't deny. And most importantly, they transformed me from a neglected kid into a woman strong enough to lead a dream. They say your 20s are the best years. Some chase fun, others fumble for their first job. Me? I became the CEO of a billion-dollar company at 22. Yes, a billion. If you think I'm exaggerating, remember that to understand how I got here, you need my earlier videos, especially the one about those 4 sleepless nights with NextGate, when everything nearly collapsed. Only by knowing how close I came to breaking can you see this billion wasn't magic, but the cost of blood, tears, and cold coffee. After surviving the security crisis, NextGate stabilized. Beta users praised our faster, safer transactions. Word spread in the startup world like wildfire. Just then, Michael Chen, if you don't recall him, check my video about our fateful dim sum lunch, brought us to a round table with top New York venture capitalists. In a sleek glass boardroom, I, a 21-year-old in a clearance blazer, had to pitch to men and women in Armani suits, each able to sign multi-million-dollar checks without blinking. Madison, one investor asked, curious yet skeptical. Why should we trust a recent grad to build a platform even big banks haven't cracked? I smiled, feeling like I was back on the valedictorian stage, but this time, I wasn't seeking my parents' eyes, but trusting my own. Because I don't carry the baggage of old ways, I'm not bound by their self-imposed limits, and I've lived in a world where fairness isn't guaranteed. I want NextGate to change that. In that moment, I felt a rare silence, the kind that signals agreement. Our Series A closed at $50 million. As I signed the papers, my hand trembled, not from fear, but from realization. NextGate was now a unicorn, a startup valued over $1 billion. The irony? I became a unicorn at 22. While at home, my parents still saw me as the kid who could take the bus. to grasp that contrast. Watch my video about the chilling call before graduation, when they chose Chloe's Bentley over my Wharton ceremony. When the media caught wind, I stayed quiet. I declined interviews, photo shoots. I didn't want my parents to know. Not yet. I wanted the day they'd look up from their morning financial paper and be shocked that their self-sufficient daughter had gone so far. One October morning, I got an email. "Congratulations, Madison Clark. You've been selected for Forbes 30 Under 30, Finance category." I read it repeatedly, heart racing. Forbes, once a distant symbol, now bore my name. But I didn't shout or boast. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and gave a bitter smile. If my parents knew, they'd brag to the neighborhood. But when I was just a high school valedictorian, they didn't bother to show up. I kept it secret. I wanted to choose the moment to reveal it, for the shock to hit hardest. Success felt strange. On one hand, I floated. Banks called for partnerships. Investors flooded in. Emails brimmed with speaking invites. On the other, I still lived in a tiny dorm, ate ramen, and rushed to submit essays. I was both a billion-dollar CEO and a student stressing over stats class. Many nights, lying in bed, the ceiling dim in the dark, I wondered, am I dreaming? Then I remembered Starbucks shifts, pizza deliveries in snow, tears in the NextGate office, and I knew, no, this wasn't a dream. It was the price of resilience. I kept my distance from my parents. We occasionally talked. They shared about shopping trips with Chloe, their renovated villa. I gave curt replies. I didn't mention NextGate. I didn't mention Forbes. Once my mother asked, "Are you okay, Madison?" I chuckled softly. "Yes, I'm fine." Fine enough that they'd only know when the world told them. I remember sitting alone in the office, yellow light casting over a whiteboard full of equations. I took a marker, wrote a number. 1,000,000,000. Staring at it, I laughed. Me, the girl who counted pennies for books, now led a billion-dollar company. I wanted to shout, "Mom, Dad, I stood up myself." But I held back. I wanted to save that shout for the right moment. NextGate's success and my Unicorn at 22 title weren't just financial wins. They were psychological victories, proof I didn't need family recognition to become what I wanted. But trust me, this was just the start. Because before the glow could fully shine, the shadows of envy, pressure, and betrayal loomed ahead. Have you ever prepared for a big day, only to find the people you wanted most weren't there? I was used to that feeling from childhood, but the bitterest part was, even at 22, on the brink of my brightest milestone, Wharton's graduation, my parents kept their same cold habit. The invitation sent with hope. I spent an entire evening crafting the invitation, choosing each word carefully. Not because I thought my parents would be surprised, but because I wanted to give myself one last chance to believe they'd show up. The red card, embossed with Wharton's logo, included my handwritten note. "I'll be speaking at graduation. If you're there, it would mean a lot to me." Simple, humble, no accusations, just a final plea. Days later, my phone buzzed, my father's number. My heart stung, half hopeful, half dreading. "Madison," his voice dry, "we got your invitation." I took a deep breath, waiting for, "We'll be there." Instead, "You handle it. Chloe's graduating high school too. We're taking her shopping in New York for her prom." I froze. If you don't know much about Chloe, my sister, check my earlier video where I detail why she was always the center of attention, from her pony-filled birthday to her shiny Bentley. Knowing her, you'll see why, once again, I was pushed aside. I tried to stay calm. "But Dad, this is my college graduation. Wharton. I'm one of the few chosen to speak." His tone didn't change. "You're independent. Handle it." Those words, like a knife into my memories. They weren't just rejecting a ceremony. They dismissed my entire journey. 3 jobs that summer, sleepless shifts, fainting in class, tears on my keyboard when NextGate nearly collapsed. "You're independent. Handle it." It sounded like praise, but was really an excuse to keep favoring Chloe and ignoring my efforts. I gave a bitter smile, saying nothing. If I spoke, tears would fall. After hanging up, I looked around my small Cambridge apartment. On my desk were NextGate documents. The company just valued at $1 billion. If you haven't heard, see my Unicorn at 22 video. I was the CEO of a startup the investment world was watching. But to my parents, it all paled next to a shopping trip with Chloe. The irony was stark. I, on Forbes 30 under 30, wasn't important enough to pull them from Manhattan for a day. The worst part? Not their absence. I was used to that. It was that I still hoped, still waited for them to say, "We'll come." When they refused, I didn't just lose their presence, I lost my last fragile hope. That night, I walked outside, the May wind biting, my heart empty. I told myself, fine. If they won't come, I'll step onto that stage without them. And when Madison Clark's name is called, the world will hear, even if my parents don't listen. That was when I truly cut the cord of expecting anything from them. I'd still do well, still succeed, but not for their pride. I'd do it for me, for those who stood by me. Jessica, Professor Wilson, the NextGate team. If you want to know more about Jessica and why I call her my chosen family, watch my video about our tough Harvard years. A silent vow. I wrote in my journal, one day, they'll see. Not at this graduation, but in major headlines, in lists they thought I'd never belong to, and then I won't need their recognition anymore. It was a promise to myself, a farewell to 2 decades of longing. That day, I realized some rejections don't just close a door, they push you onto a path with no return. And I chose to keep going, alone. If you've ever waited for a secret to be revealed at the right moment, imagine me sitting in Dean Harrison's office, the stern Wharton dean, when he said, "Madison, Forbes wants to honor you at graduation." I thought I misheard. Countless sleepless nights, moments of collapse, all condensed into one sentence. The name Forbes, once reserved for untouchable giants, was about to be tied to mine, announced before thousands. The dean looked at me through silver-rimmed glasses, his voice proud yet cautious. "They've selected you for 30 under 30 and want to introduce you as the self-made CEO of Unicorn NextGate. We plan to announce it at the ceremony." My heart raced. Part of me was elated. The truth was finally out. But another part hesitated. I hadn't prepared for the world to know. I'd wanted to keep this success hidden, a trump card to stun my family at the perfect moment. "I'm not sure," I stammered. "Announcing it will draw too much attention." He smiled calmly. "Madison, your journey isn't just personal success. It's inspiration. Don't hide the light you've worked to ignite." I left his office with mixed feelings, excitement, anxiety, and a premonition. I knew once this news spread, my parents wouldn't stay silent. The familiar call. As expected, 3 days later at NextGate's office, my phone rang. "Dad." "Madison," his voice unusually warm. "We just saw the news. Why didn't you tell us?" I closed my eyes. So they'd seen it, maybe in a financial paper or on social media. My name in Forbes, tied to youngest self-made billionaire. And now, his tone was suddenly enthusiastic, as if he'd never told me to take the bus. "We've decided to come to your graduation," he continued. "The whole family will be there." I nearly laughed. A week ago, they were too busy shopping for Chloe. Now, they were ready to drop everything to support me. I didn't ask why, I just said, "I understand." But inside, a question swirled. Were they coming for me or for the fame tied to me? Doubt amid joy. That night, alone in my dorm, the Forbes draft glowed on my laptop. From bus rides to billion-dollar valuations. I laughed. It was true. But the bitterness was that my parents only cared when those words hit the news, not when I struggled through sleepless nights. I wondered, at the ceremony, would their eyes on me be pride or calculation? Talking with Jessica. Jessica, my constant companion, wasn't surprised they'd changed their minds. If you don't know her, see my video about our tough Harvard years, where she became my chosen family. "Maddie," she called me by my nickname. "You don't need their presence to prove anything." But part of me still wants them to really see me. She took my hand. They might come for the wrong reasons, but I'll be there for the right ones. And I'm not the only one. Her words silenced me. She was right. I wouldn't be alone on that stage. I had a team that believed in me, real companions. A flash of memory. In that moment, I thought of Chloe. If you want to know why she was always the star in my parents' eyes, check my video about her Bentley and that fateful shopping trip. Chloe wasn't wrong for being pampered, but the fault was my parents turning me into a shadow. I wondered, did she see the disparity, or did she take it as natural, preparing for the shock? As graduation neared, I stayed silent. I didn't tell my parents about my speech, the Forbes announcement, or the special honor. I wanted it to hit like a bolt from the blue. In my heart, there was both satisfaction and pain. Satisfaction that they'd finally faced the truth. Pain that I shouldn't have needed Forbes or $1 billion for them to see me. Before the storm. The night before, I stood by my window watching Philadelphia's lights flicker. I told myself, tomorrow everything changes. They'll never look at me with disdain again. But part of me trembled, because when the truth was revealed, would our fractured relationship mend or shatter completely? Have you ever faced a moment where the truth comes to light, but you're not sure you're ready for the consequences? That's where I stood. And trust me, the next day, at the ceremony, when Madison Clark's name was called with billion-dollar figures, my parents' faces would be the clearest proof of the tables turning. They say graduation is a day for families to celebrate together. For me, it was the day the truth hit like a slap. Not at me, but at my parents. That morning, Philadelphia gleamed with fresh sunlight. Students in red and blue gowns crowded for photos, families with balloons and flowers. I watched, finding it oddly amusing. People arrived in shiny SUVs, Uber Blacks lining the gate. Me? I stood waiting for bus 44, my pass trembling in my hand. Why the bus, when I could have called a private car or had NextGate's team drive me? It was a statement. They, my parents, had told me to take the bus, so I would. But the difference was, I rode the bus not because I had no choice, but because I wanted to etch my journey into memory. On the bus, by the window, watching familiar streets pass, I thought, this might be the last bus ride where I feel I have to prove anything. At Harvard Yard, actually an extended Philly campus for that year's ceremony, music blared, crimson flags waved. I saw them, my parents in the family section, my mother in a pale green dress, face perfectly made up, my father in a dark suit holding the program, Chloe beside them, eyes glued to her phone. Seeing them, my heart skipped. Part of me was still that 80-year-old craving their gaze, but their eyes, as usual, were cold and distant. I forced a smile, kept walking, didn't stop. The ceremony was solemn yet thrilling. Names were called, applause thundered. When my turn came, Dean Harrison stood, his voice like a bell. Madison Clark, graduating with honors in finance. The applause was enough to move me, but he wasn't done. He took a breath, addressing the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to announce that Madison Clark is not only an outstanding student, she's the CEO and founder of NextGate, a fintech company valued at $1 billion. Forbes has named her the youngest self-made billionaire in finance this year. The auditorium erupted. Applause, cheers, gasps of, "Oh my God!" Chairs scraped as students stood, parents whispered, eyes turned to me. And then, the moment I'd waited years for arrived. Dad dropped the program, Mom stunned, sister stunned. From the stage, I glanced at the family section. My father, the man who casually said, "Take the bus," dropped his program, hands shaking as he bent to pick it up. My mother sat frozen, hand over mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. Chloe, for the first time, looked up from her phone, staring at me with a mix of confusion and awe. I stood under the spotlight, smiling softly, not mocking, not arrogant, the smile of someone who'd finally proven I didn't need my parents to shine, but the truth still stunned them. I took the diploma, stepped to the mic, and began my speech. My voice was calm, but inside a storm raged. We often think success comes from support, but sometimes It comes from being forced to stand alone. I took the bus here, and I'll return to my company as a CEO, not to prove anything to others, but to myself." The auditorium roared. I saw the dean nod approvingly, and when I looked down, my parents were still there, faces like stone. I thought, was this what you wanted to miss for a New York shopping trip? A Wharton ceremony? A billion-dollar CEO? A Forbes 30 under 30? If this wasn't a lesson in blind favoritism, I don't know what was. But alongside the satisfaction, a quiet sadness lingered. This could have been a beautiful memory if my parents had truly believed in and loved me, but they'd chosen another path, and now the gap between us only widened. As the final applause faded, I stepped off the stage, heart pounding. I knew my parents would approach. They'd have to say something. And for the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the child begging for recognition, but the one holding the choice. If the moment my name was called was a bolt from a clear sky, the moment I stepped off the stage was the storm. At the edge of the grass, lined with white chairs, amid congratulatory laughter and camera clicks, I saw my parents approaching. It felt like watching two meteors hurtling down, dazzling and dangerous. My father reached me first. He hugged me, his cologne strong and unfamiliar on my gown. "Madison, why didn't you tell us?" His voice was louder than needed, as if announcing to everyone he was the dad of a self-made billionaire. My mother grabbed my hand, hers trembling but her smile camera-ready. "My daughter," she said, emphasizing "my" like a stage prop, "this is incredible. We need to sit down, discuss details, plans, the future, the press." I gave a faint smile. Typical them, barely processing the truth before turning it into their language. Plans and future. My mind flashed to Chloe's Bentley, the New York shopping, the take the bus, all forming a cold logic. When I was a low-risk investment, they ignored me. Now that profits shone, they wanted in. "I need family, not a deal," I said calmly. My father's face stiffened, like an investor hearing a startup reject a lucrative term sheet. "You're misunderstanding," he lowered his voice. "I have financial experience. If I joined NextGate's advisory board, it could—" "Boost the Clark family brand," I cut in, half sarcastic. "Don't mistake this, Dad. I built NextGate for people like me, kids abandoned by those meant to protect them, to have equal tools. Not to prove how shiny the Clark badge is." My mother blinked rapidly. "You're exaggerating, Madison. We've always been proud of you." "Proud in silence?" I tilted my head. "Where were you for my valedictorian speech? My first Harvard thesis defense? Even this morning, I took the bus, just like you said. But I stood on that stage alone because I chose to, not because no one came." A few curious eyes lingered. My parents seemed to sense their social mask cracking. My father adjusted his tie, my mother gripped my hand tighter. "Come on," my father switched to a negotiating tone. "Don't be emotional. The market's hot. You need a media strategy. I know editors. Mom can arrange cover photos, talk shows. We, family, should appear united." "Family?" I repeated, my smile thin as a blade. "Family is the people in the front row today. Jessica, Professor Wilson, the NextGate team, who stood up when I fell, not when Forbes called my name." Jessica's name was a cue. She approached from the crowd, hugging me tightly, warmly. "Congrats, Maddie." Then to my parents. "Hello, sir, ma'am." Polite enough, distant enough. My father kept his smile, but his eyes hardened. "Thank you. You must know sustaining a valuation requires a network. Family can provide." "The only thing family needs to provide," I interrupted, "is presence, not press contacts." My words landed like a pebble rippling water. I heard gowns rustling, laughter fading, leaving a square silence around us. Then a small but firm voice cut in. "She's right, Chloe." She'd been standing there, unnoticed, phone in hand, screen dark. She rarely held my gaze longer than a second, but now, her eyes locked on mine, seeking an anchor. "I'm tired," she said, voice hoarse, unfamiliar. "Tired of always having to be the perfect, shining star on schedule. I know Mom and Dad love me their way, but I want to live real." If I can, I want to follow you. Not because you're famous, but because you're free. My mother froze. Chloe, what are you saying? You have prom, UCLA plans, the Bentley. Chloe gave a sad smile. Mom, that car was never my dream. It was our family brand's dream. She turned to me, her green eyes, our mother's prized genetic legacy, now clear and piercing. Sis, will you give me a chance? My heart softened, like ice cracking under sunlight. For years, I'd blamed Chloe for being the center. But maybe, just as I was caged by strength, she was trapped in a gilded cage called Darling. My father jumped in, anxious, as if the conversation was slipping. Don't be impulsive, Chloe. Your sister's young. She should advise you to focus on school, not chase media. Focus on school, I echoed, bitter. From the man who told me to handle it at my Wharton graduation. I took a deep breath, feeling a decision stretch in my chest. Fine. If you want to discuss plans, let's start with the basics. Human decency. My father's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Respect, I said. From now on, no more you're stronger, you don't need much. No more Chloe needs more. No more turning family into a PR project. If you want into my life, we sign an unwritten deal. Be honest, apologize honestly, be present honestly. My mother blinked, mascara trembling. Are you teaching us how to parent? No, I said, voice low. I'm inviting you to parent for the first time. A long silence. I saw gears turning in my father's eyes as he struggled to shift from power's language to vulnerability, almost a foreign tongue. He cleared his throat, stepped back, then forward. I was wrong on some things. The word wrong stumbled on his tongue like a stone. But you have to understand the pressure. Dad, I gently cut in. I don't need a list of reasons. I need you to say I'm sorry. Not to close the past, but to open the future. My mother clutched her bag, nails glinting. I don't know where to start. Start today, I said. Tonight, I have a NextGate team meeting. No gala, no red carpet. Just the people who were there when I needed them. If you want to come, come as family, not partners. No PR talk, no strategy. Just listen. Chloe smiled faintly, exhaling. I'll go if you'll let me. Always, I replied. My father checked his watch, an old habit, then looked at me. Longer, more uncertain. He nodded slightly, like signing a contract he hadn't fully read. I'll try. I nodded. I note that try. A group of classmates ran up for photos. I turned, smiling genuinely, not for cameras, but because I felt lighter. As the shutter clicked, I heard my mother whisper to my father, "Did we lose something important before we lost that program?" Her question hung in the May breeze, both late and honest. After the photos, I turned back. I have to go, they're waiting. Madison, my father called. I paused, waiting. He swallowed. Congratulations. Just 2 words, plain. But because they cost him to say, they carried weight. Enough for me not to dismiss them. Thank you, Dad. I pulled Chloe along. As we left the grass, she whispered, Sis, if I lose my way again, remind me of today, okay? Of course, I smiled. And if I falter, remind me we escaped our cages. The breeze swept through the trees, carrying faint music. I knew this talk wouldn't transform my parents in 15 minutes, but it set a marker. From now, I wouldn't trade family for conditions, nor let the past rob the future's chance. A few steps later, I glanced back. My parents stood together, silent, each holding their own void. I didn't know what they thought, of me, themselves, or the dropped program. But for the first time, they seemed smaller, more human, less like roles. I held Chloe's hand tighter. A soft click sounded in my heart, like a lock sealing one door and another opening. To what? I didn't know. But I sensed the road ahead wouldn't be smooth, calculations returning, family offers, and a financial collapse I hadn't foreseen. I took a deep breath. Let's go, I said. Tonight, we celebrate like normal people. Chloe smiled, sunlight breaking in her eyes. Like family, she corrected. I didn't argue. But a thin premonition tightened. My old family was about to face a shock, and I, the unicorn at 22, would have to choose, turn away or open my hand. 3 years after graduation, I learned a cold truth. Applause fades, but family fractures echo long. One October morning, my assistant woke me at 6. Maddie, the financial news is exploding. Your parents are on the front page. I opened my phone. Amid headlines of overleverage, resort real estate, and fraud allegations were two familiar names, Robert and Diane Clark. I wasn't shocked. I just felt a stillness, like a lake before a storm. After the program drop at Wharton, we'd kept a fragile pact: respect, presence, no using my name as a PR ticket. But victory is an old addiction. When the real estate market boomed, my parents dove in like moths to a flame. My father's text shifted from proud family to new cycle, cheap money, smart leverage. My mother sent photos of a beachfront project's ribbon cutting, champagne raised. I replied with a nod emoji. I didn't interfere, nor shield them. Then bad news hit like firecrackers. Leaked emails showed inflated revenues, guaranteed profit contracts that were hollow. As interest rates rose, the bubble burst, banks foreclosed, fraud appeared in headlines. I expected a call, some circling talk, but that evening my doorbell rang. My parents stood before me. Robert, once striding into rooms like he owned them, now slouched, coat wrinkled. Diane, never leaving home without perfect lipstick, wore an old cloth mask, eyes shadowed. They sat in my kitchen. My father scanned my minimalist apartment, as if seeing his failure in every item. He cut to it. Madison, we need your help. No jargon, no portfolio optimization, just a raw need. I asked, how much debt? He listed figures like a boardroom report: construction loans, private bonds, penalties. I calculated quickly. They didn't need a patch, they needed surgery. I took a breath. I'll help, but not with cash. I won't pay your debts. I'll help with legal, negotiations, restructuring your life. And there are conditions. My father's eyes narrowed. Conditions? Respect, I said. Every meeting has an independent lawyer. Every signature has counsel. No more using my name. No more backroom deals. And you move out of the villa, live somewhere affordable, cut spending to the bone. This isn't punishment. It's math. My mother swallowed. We've listed it, no buyers. Because everyone knows the bank will seize it, I said. Get ahead, don't get dragged. That night, I made 3 calls. A personal bankruptcy lawyer, a crisis PR consultant, a senior debt relief agency. I'm Madison Clark, I said. I need a Chapter 11 plan, creditor negotiations, and temporary housing for a couple in their 60s. The other end paused, then answered professionally. When I hung up, my hands stopped shaking. 2 weeks later, the villa was repossessed. Robert and Diane moved to a 4th-floor loft, windows facing an oily parking lot. I helped sign the lease, change locks, set up budget internet. As I placed an old coffee maker on their chipped counter, my mother cried, I never imagined. I handed her a tissue. You still have each other. My father didn't cry. He quietly stacked books, ones he'd quoted at every dinner. Placing the last one, he turned, voice hoarse. I'm sorry, I measured you by market standards. I didn't say I forgive you. Forgiveness is a journey, not a switch. I nodded. From now, we learn the alphabet again: truth, real apologies, real presence. The days after were small tasks: updating addresses, negotiating hospital bill payments, drafting debt deferral emails. I taught them budgeting, explained compounding interest, in reverse, as penalties. My mother sometimes asked, Are you tired? I smiled. I was tired enough for 4 sleepless nights. This is tired with purpose. The press hounded, but the narrative shifted, from fraud to leverage consequences. A tabloid ran a photo of my mother with discount groceries. The lawyer asked if we'd sue. I said, no, let it sit as a mirror. One afternoon, I saw my father mopping. I offered to hire a cleaner. He shook his head. I need to do it myself. Madison, you're not helping for honor or brand. Why? I answered, because I chose to be the person I needed at 18. He nodded, eyes blinking fast. That night, on their narrow balcony overlooking the lot, I thought of the beautiful irony. I was lifting those who didn't lift me. Maybe that's freedom, not repeating what hurt you. Helping isn't erasing debt, it's setting boundaries so they learn to stand. 2 months into the plan, I got an email. A creditor threatened to sue me for interfering. I smiled, closed my laptop, storm after storm, familiar orbit. I'd chosen the hard path, open hands, firm principles. As the elevator opened, my phone buzzed. Chloe's text. Sis, I'm transferring to New York. I want to be near mom and dad. And you. I'm ready to work. Anything. I leaned against the cold steel. Okay. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. at the foundation office. Wear flats. On the way home, I stopped at a print shop. I pulled an old photo, me at 10, behind Chloe's piano recital stage, holding plastic flowers. I had it enlarged, framed cheaply. That night, I hung it in my parents' new apartment, beside their budget sheet. When my mother asked, why, I said, to remind us human eyes can learn to look again. 3 years ago, I took the bus to prove I didn't need them. Now, I walked into their rented apartment to prove I chose to help on clear terms. And that was the one principle I never negotiated. I'll help, but you must learn to respect everyone's worth. The story seemed to settle, but I knew the final chapter waited, where we'd sign a new deal, not in ink, but in how we lived. People think the ultimate victory is making those who hurt you kneel. For me, it came in a small Chicago cafe, when I placed a thick envelope on the table and said the words I'd held for over 2 decades. I'll help, but from now on, you respect everyone's worth. No more favoritism, no more dismissal. The cafe sat on an unremarkable corner. Creaky wooden chairs, dim yellow lights. It was the opposite of the lavish boardrooms my parents knew. But maybe that simplicity suited a real conversation. My parents sat across from me. Robert, once commanding hundreds of investors, stared down, fingers fidgeting with his cup. Diane, never leaving home without regal poise, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. I set the envelope down, the soft thud like a final note. Inside was enough money to cover their most urgent debts: rent, medical bills, credit card threats. This isn't money you're entitled to, I said calmly. It's my choice, and it comes with conditions. They looked up. I held their gaze. From now on, if you want to be in my life, you learn to respect everyone's worth. No more Chloe needs more or Madison can handle it. No more favoritism, no more dismissal. If not, this envelope is a one-time thing. My father shifted, ready to argue, then stopped. Maybe he knew his reign was over. My mother cried, her sobs muffled in the tissue. We've been so wrong, she murmured. Can you believe we'll change? I gave a faint smile. Trust isn't a signed check. It's paid in installments. Every day, every action, bit by bit. Saying those words, I thought I'd feel triumphant. But I felt relief. I realized revenge doesn't heal. Only setting boundaries, keeping principles, and conditional compassion break the cycle. My mind replayed memories like a reversed film. The empty valedictorian seats, the exhausting 3-job summer, the nights crying over NextGate's keyboard. They piled up, but instead of bitterness, I saw they led me here. The moment I could say, enough. Robert, for the first time, wiped tears openly. He took my hand, the hand that once directed millions, now trembling. I'm sorry, he said. 3 simple words, but I waited until 25 to hear them. Diane choked. I'm sorry. You deserved so much more. Their tears unsettled me. I wasn't ready to fully forgive, but I realized, sometimes, financial ruin is the price for learning the basic lesson. Family isn't stock. As I left the cafe, I left the envelope. They held hands, faces both ashamed and grateful. I didn't look back, not out of coldness, but because I'd given them a chance, and how they used it was up to them. Outside, Chicago's chilly breeze brushed my face, but my heart was warm. Not the warmth of a grand win, but of peace. I'd chosen not to live in hatred. On the flight back to New York, by the window, watching clouds stretch, I thought, If someone told that 18-year-old juggling 3 jobs that she'd one day save her parents with the principles they lacked, she'd have laughed. But it was true. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing the past. It's facing it and choosing not to let it steer your future. I did that not because they deserved it, but because I deserved freedom. The next day, Chloe texted, "Sis, thanks for setting conditions. I need them too. I want to live real, not as the darling anymore." I smiled. Maybe real change started not with my parents but the next generation. And I believed with firm principles, we could rewrite the family script. People measure worth by money, fame, headlines. But I learned true worth is choosing compassion over hatred, setting boundaries over enduring. In that small cafe, as my parents cried and nodded, I knew I'd won, not against them, but against the darkness in my heart. And if you ever face a similar moment, remember, you can offer the envelope, but you can set conditions. Compassion isn't ignoring wrongs, it's saying, "I'll help, but we change together." Maybe, hearing this story, you realize what took me years to learn. Real success isn't money or fame, but knowing you deserve respect and daring to set boundaries with those who dismissed you. I went from a girl taking the bus alone on graduation day to a CEO, then circled back to face my parents in their collapse. And instead of revenge, I chose conditional compassion. Because only with conditions does forgiveness avoid blind sacrifice. I believe we all can face family wounds. But what matters is turning scars into strength and choosing a path that doesn't repeat old mistakes. If this story resonates, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and hit subscribe to join me in the next chapters.